You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more on your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and a scary, Halloween scary decision we sometimes have to make is whether or not to unfriend someone on Facebook or wherever else. And I'm sure some of you are like, block, 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 block. In other cases, it may weigh something really heavy on your mind. So today, I'm so excited that PhD candidate and friend of the podcast, Nate Wu, is here to help us think about unfriending. Welcome, Nate. Welcome back to Best Forevers.
Woo, hello. What's up, everyone? Nice to talk again.
Yes, I'm so excited. And Nate, can I just say it's been far too long?
Yeah, I agree. But I've appreciated the pod postcards that have arrived in my mailbox when I was in Arizona, and so the friendship is still there.
Yes, absolutely. Friendship is always there, Nate. And one of the things is that you need to know or need to remember is that Nate is an interpersonal communication rock star who is studying at the University of Arizona. Go Wildcats. And he's been on the podcast before talking about how to maintain relationships through social media. And episode 8, Making Friends is Hard. Episode 8, we're in like 130s. And you might recall, though, and I have been influenced greatly by Nate, in that he sends postcards to his friends whenever he goes to, say, like a conference, and he sent me postcards. And so that really sort of got me going, okay, yeah, we definitely need to send more snail mail. Like, this is such a fun way to stay in contact with people. And so over the last couple of years, I've been doing mailings from December through February to people who want to receive mail as sort of like a little head nod or cap nod to Nate, a little shout out. But I love it. Just this idea that something small, grabbing a couple postcards wherever you might travel. And I know we can't do it a lot now, but just a great way. Like, my mail is awful right now. Talk about scary. I've already voted. Yeah. Leave me alone.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I have about like 5 pounds of like political ads in my mailbox from the last week alone.
Yeah. I want to put one of those blue recycling bins underneath it and be like, political flyers here, I voted. But also it's like junk mail and other things. And it's like, I'm so excited when I actually get an envelope or a postcard or something fun in the mail. So I feel like, Nate, you really like left an impression on me and hopefully on those that listen to Best Forever. So again, so glad to have you back. We won't wait over 130 episodes to have you back the next time if you so want to come.
That sounds good to me.
That sounds good. Yeah, excellent. So, but Nate is here today because unfriending is something that I'm sure a lot of people have been doing recently. Or it's just something happens among friends or other people and you're like, what do you do? So Nate, you've been doing some research on unfriending. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what unfriending is and then sort of what your thoughts are about it. I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those phenomenons that, it started about 6 years or so ago, really in like 2014, 2015. Mm-hmm. It made a lot of press like in this 2017. I believe like you even mentioned that there was like a Netflix show or like a movie or something about unfriending.
Yes, I watched 2 horror movies, which I love that unfriending has to do with the horror genre, which really brings in the Friends to the End October scary sort of spookiness that we have going on with the podcast. But yeah, there's one called Friend Request. And then there's one called Unfriended, and it does not turn out well for people.
And that's
Spoiler
about
alert.
Right. Yeah. We like to think of unfriending as like a deliberate, a conscious act by someone to kind of terminate some type of dyadic relationship. This isn't like I just randomly decided to haphazardly do this. Like, no, like it takes, it's conscious, it's effortful. And, it's different from friendship. When you start friendships, as Dr. Duck brought up, because it could be very asymmetrical. Like one person can decide to like terminate the friendship. Yeah. Whereas when you typically start friendships, it's bilateral, right? Both people kind of consent to making this work. And a lot of the times when we think of unfriending, we think of like active unfriending, where you have that conversation, or you have the text message conversation, or the phone call, the DMs, whatever it is these days, right? Where you reach out to an individual person. It's like, hey, listen, like, we just need to call it quits. Or there's the active unfriending and ghosting, where like you there isn't even any communication, but you maybe just randomly one day find out that you've been ghosted, or maybe you're the ghoster.
Well, that just reminds me of when sometimes you'll see on Facebook where someone's like, annual friend purge. If you make it, I'll see you on the other side. And then it's like, you might see that. And then the next day you're like, oh my God, that was me. What did I do?
It's like, oh, it's been a week since I last saw this person post something. Oh, that's why, right? And so, like, a lot of the times when we think about this unfriending phenomena, we think of like this active modality, like intentionally going out and doing this. But someone on the research team that I work with Dr. Floyd is that, there's kind of this idea of maybe like invited unfriending or passive unfriending, or rather than going out specifically to an individual, you kind of use social media specifically as like this mass call. Like, hey, listen, you know what? If you don't agree with this, unfriend me now. Or if you don't vote for this candidate, just unfriend me. Right? And so there's kind of like, there's a conceptual difference between going about like actively unfriending people, which we typically think about in like an interpersonal sense. And then there's like idea of like passive invited unfriending, where you kind of like, you pose a message to try to maybe understand who may differ with you in some way. And it's kind of a way to sever the relationship, but you don't take responsibility for it, right? It's like, if you really don't do this, you should unfriend me. I'm not going to unfriend you, but you're the one who should unfriend me.
Yeah, it's like the ball's in your court, but is the Facebook algorithm correct for them to actually see the first message that says to unfriend them?
Exactly, and I'll definitely get around to that as a limitation for sure. But it's interesting because it really shifts kind of like the burden for terminating a relationship from the poster to the other people. Exactly as you said, right? Like the ball's in your court. So this is really what we wanted to explore in this very exploratory 2-part study, because quite frankly, there just isn't a lot of scholarship looking at this phenomenon that is kind of this invited unfriending.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing that Nate's mentioned Dr. Duck and Dr. Floyd. These are amazing people in the interpersonal communication field. Dr. Steve Duck, who's now retired, I believe, or he deserves it.
Stevie deserves it, that's for sure.
He deserves it. And then Dr. Corey Floyd does amazing work on affection and all sorts of different interpersonal topics. And you probably have heard him on some podcasts too, because I know that he has spoken on some as well. But but I just love, I wanted to give them shout outs because they're amazing, right? And it was so fun to learn about them in undergrad or graduate school, because Dr. Floyd's a little bit younger than Steve Duck, right? But I think it's amazing that we're doing research on these topics. So I'm so glad to hear that, because I think that as technology changes, as our world changes, that there's sort of new phenomenon that come up that we just don't fully understand. Absolutely. So by doing the research, we can learn a little bit more about it, what it is, what's going on, and maybe even what we can do about it. So talk about, you said it was a 2 parts. You did 2 studies?
It was, yeah. So, I definitely want to acknowledge the whole research team on this.
Yes,
right?
please.
We have Dr. Corey Floyd, Rob Matheny, Dana Dinsmore, Ben Custer, myself. And, this is one of those, again, very exploratory, because we wanted to see, like, well, there really isn't a lot out there. Maybe, can we understand this from a potential theoretical perspective as well as an applied perspective? And so, this idea of, a need to belong, right? The idea of you got to have your friends, you got to have your family, you just got to have that in-group membership, like a very, very innate need to belong. But again, it's kind of maybe at a little bit of a conflict between this idea then of, well, unfriending, or in a sense, kind of drawing the line between who you consider to be part of that in-group and who you may consider to be part of that out-group. And so, there's that idea of we got to really kind of prioritize our in-group members, and that occurs through homophily, and, we got the idea of similarity.
Yeah.
And so, but then at the same time, we have this concept of selective avoidance, right? Where we may selectively choose who we want to hang out at some parties, or who we want to go to the beach with, or who we want to have coffee with.
Yeah.
And sometimes it may become a situation where there is so much selective avoidance for a specific friend, or perhaps group of friends, where it just isn't worth the maintenance anymore. Like,
absolutely. You're like, over it.
Yeah. It's like, you know what? It just ain't worth it, right?
It's not worth it.
Right.
Which is hard for me to say, like, okay, I have to be realistic, right? I absolutely love friendship. So I understand sort of like the struggle between like, this is someone who was in my in-group, but now like it's not worth it anymore. And that is really hard to come to grasp with, because I feel like in some cases when I was younger, like I'm supposed to be friends with people, or that it's just supposed to continue. But I also have to be realistic and know that not all friendships are going to work. And if it's weighing on you, if it's toxic, or it's not worth it anymore, then, block, snip, snip, snip.
Right. And, again, like if it's the topic of one of those, it's like a spooky idea about friendship, right?
Yeah.
Maybe one that a lot of people don't want to talk about. But, with these ideas in mind, we really wanted to kind of better understand. We wanted to pose these questions of like, how common is this behavior? First of all, like, is this happening left and right? You're seeing it every single day, right? What type of messages are people actually communicating? Right?
Nice.
Are these unfriend requests about, like, if you don't like the color blue, right? If you don't enjoy the new Travis Scott meal, what kind of messages are actually people talking about?
Yeah.
And then actually, maybe even more importantly, like what are the characteristics of the type of people who engage in this type of unfriending? Like, are they big on the big five? Are they the more lonely people, right? Is there something about them that maybe makes them engage in this behavior more often than not?
Yeah.
And then, what kind of role does this really have? The role specifically of like uninviting friends in terms of how people feel connected with one another. So of course, we couldn't answer all these questions in one study. So we did two studies. The first study was actually more of like a thematic analysis. We randomly selected a whole bunch of Facebook posts that were publicly available with the phrase "unfriend me now."
Sorry. I just love, like, y'all, you make it public. Y'all up for research. I love it, though.
Exactly.
And then that you could search and that you could find. There's a parlor game right there. Like, search "unfriend me now." What are people doing? What are people saying? So what did you find? That's amazing.
And to your point, though, it's like it's beautiful in the sense that, the fact that people are willing to announce this publicly, like knowingly too, that this isn't, like a private post where only the friends can see, but open to the world.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. So we found over 500 posts.
Wow.
500 posts with this "unfriend me now" phrase. And, in order to try to reduce as much bias as possible, Dr. Floyd and Rob, they removed all the likes from the posts. They removed the post photos, all the comments. So when we coded them, we didn't have any kind of like a lot of people like this, or, this person was really attractive, or whatever it is, right? Just to focus on the message itself. And, after going through all these different posts, we definitely found a list of specific reasons of why people engage or try to go about this idea of, hey, just unfriend me. And the most prevalent one was having different likes and dislikes, right? So, example, like if you're not a fan of CMU athletics, unfriend me now.
Oh,
exactly. Right. Right. It's like, gosh, like if you just don't like CMU athletics, like, we have nothing to talk about. Just unfriend me now.
Nate, feel free after this to unfriend me if you want.
I am a fan. I promise.
Okay, thank you. See, I even said go Wildcats at the beginning. Come on.
I know. If you're not a fan, I'm a fan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I digress.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely the most common one. Roughly 15% of all the posts were related to different likes or dislikes. Now, interestingly enough, too politically right that was either voting conservatively or being outwardly against more democratic liberal candidates or deals. That was the tied for being the second most common, with having different views, both around 13%. So, this could be like, hey, like, if you voted for Trump, unfriend me now. Like, if you didn't vote for this candidate, unfriend me now. Different views would be like, if you don't believe in climate change, unfriend me now, and wherever that is.
Can I just, like, obviously this is a very important thing to say right now, because this is coming out on October 30th, is no matter what you do, just be sure you vote.
Yep. Cast your
November 3rd, exercise that right to vote. But
you got time.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And, so some people right now may be wondering, well, what about, people who said, if you're too politically left, or, if you vote against, liberal ideas or conservatives. Interestingly enough, that only occurred in 4% of the total posts. That only occurred in 4%. And, other ones that followed that weren't really prevalent for like religious beliefs, that was only at 4.5%. Not sharing the same humor, not really using a certain product. The only other one that was really very noticeable was outward dislike or disrespect for the poster, right? So it's like, if you don't like me for doing this, or if you don't reply to my messages, unfriend me now. And so, these results are kind of really suggesting that there's a strong tendency for these posters to really kind of value this idea of in-group preference, right? Not sharing the same beliefs, not having the same interests, just not liking me as a person. And, it's interesting because it's one of those phenomena, again, where it's not like these posts are specific or going out to a specific individual. It's kind of, cast out as a wide net to their entire social network.
So, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And so did the research team try to assess maybe implications or try to understand why some of these might have been the case? Like, for example, like you mentioned that 4% was if they were too left, but second was far too right. Could it be because people are more likely to post publicly if it was too right? And, are there some factors that might come into play here? Or maybe we don't understand that yet. And so we're kind of working towards that.
We try to get a better understanding that in the second study. And so the second study, we actually surveyed over 400 Facebook users. We actually went through Amazon's Mechanical Turk. So we just, we didn't randomly just find Facebook users. We went through MTurk. We made sure that, these were the master workers with, a high approval rating and all that stuff. And so, to your point, we kind of asked them, well, have you been someone who's posted it before? Have you been on the receiving end of, receiving one of those posts, and what have you thought about them? Like, is this a big deal? I think it's important to mention that, before we go into the specifics of what we found, this was a pretty well representative sample of the United States. The average age was, 38. It was equal men and women. And only 10% of the sample actually had posted one of these invited messages. There was no difference between men or women, between, posting or not posting. Posters were a little bit younger on average. But if you remember how I said that one of the biggest differences was this idea of like political orientation, right? There was no significant difference whatsoever between political orientation, race, ethnicity, education level, none of that, between whether or not someone would make that unfriend request or not, which is, right? And so we're like, wow.
I'm just going, okay, there's no sex differences, race differences, political differences,
nothing.
Education differences. This is fascinating.
Even more interesting is that there were no differences in terms of, the big five personality dimensions, right? So these posters weren't any more or less extroverted. They weren't any more or less agreeable, conscientious, neurotic, open, or lonely.
So what's going on?
So what's going on? Well, This may be interesting because
Yeah.
we did also ask them about their attachment styles.
Mm-hmm.
And we did find that posters who did post these messages were higher on their, in terms of having a secure attachment style than their non-posters, right?
Wow.
So it is kind of this idea that, you know, if you are secure with your attachment style, like you do have that kind of self-confidence in yourself and the people around you, you may not be worried about losing those friends that you may not want to be friends with.
That's really interesting. And you know, for those folks who might not know, I'm sure as Nate was saying, the attachment style, like secure and that sort of thing, there are attachment styles. Did you want to talk a little bit more about the attachment styles?
Sure, I'll take it away. Yeah. So when we talk about someone who has a secure attachment style, it's like, okay, when you're in a relationship, right? Like how in that dyadic relationship, how kind of like secure, I know that I'm using the same word here, but you know, how much confidence, how like
certain.
Yeah, certain's a good word. How much certainty do you have in yourself? How much certainty do you have in the other person? So someone who has a secure attachment style is high in certainty, kind of high in that self-confidence of themselves and with the other person. We did find that posters who scored lower, the posters who did make these Facebook posts, they did score lower in terms of having a fearful, avoidant attachment style. So that idea of, you know, less self-confidence, less certainty in themselves and the other people than the non-posters did. And these were the only significant differences. And if we think about the difference in attachment styles, that kind of makes sense, right? Like on the one hand, you have those that are just so confident in themselves and they're so secure in their relationships that they're willing to kind of make these posts and put them outright. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we also have those that maybe kind of just I just don't know. Maybe they're not the ones to initiate that type of unfriending on a one-to-one level. So instead they post it, they cast it out of the net, and then they kind of like turn around and they walk away and they see what happens the next day. Right?
The adventure of unfriending people.
Exactly. And, you know, out of our sample, over 70% said that, they've actually received or they've seen one of those unfriending posts. So to kind of answer your question from earlier, like, are people actually seeing these, you know, like, because of the Facebook algorithms and all that, you know, over 70% have, which is a pretty decent amount, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and, you know, but one of the interesting things too is you can actually, you know, you can post something online, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you mean it, right? Like you could post something and it could be like, I'm going to throw it out here, but I don't really mean it, or I really, really mean this. So we also wanted to see if there was actually like meaning and intention behind these posts, right? Like, are they just doing it for fun, for laughs, for the memes, right? Like, if you don't like SpongeBob, unfriend me now. Or like, is it like serious? Like, if you don't like SpongeBob, unfriend me now. Right? Like, there's a difference.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, we surveyed them on that, and on a 1 to 9 scale, ranging from, you know, not at all, I'm not at all serious of unfriending you, to like, really,
it's
really serious. It's actually going to happen. The average was right smack dab in the middle. It was like a 4.5, where that's, you know, if they're moderately serious about this. You know, it's not a joke. It's not like this is life or death. But even more interestingly is that the correlation between how serious they were to actually making their posts to like how much they actually really valued what they were posting had a correlation of 0.58.
Wow.
So big. It's a pretty clear indication that really the more relevant and the more that they valued whatever topic that they were posting about, be it differences or political affiliation, whatever, the more serious they really were about having people unfriend them.
Yeah. And I can see that. And I'm sure many people who are listening can see that and say the last couple months, and as we get closer to the presidential election, or we might have seen more of these, or that when people post that, like, there's a tone and a conversation that might follow in the thread or post before and after that would really sort of clue one in, like, this is serious. And most people probably wouldn't take the SpongeBob one as serious. Like,
Exactly.
okay, they're starting jokes. Okay. Yeah.
Right,
and then
right.
people are in the thread like, if you don't like water, then and if you don't like,
Yeah.
if you don't like friendship, actually I might unfriend people.
Ooh.
That's the thing that's hard, because it's like, because part of me is like thinking about people unfriending because of reasons like differences in likes and dislikes or political beliefs, that like part of me is like, isn't sort of one of the good parts of life is like learning from other people and having fun debates, or like
Right.
learning about a new band that you weren't in because you only listen to pop. I'm thinking me, like, but at the same time, like, I get it where there's something like, if you're voting for this candidate, which is everything against who I am and me as a human being, for example, like, I can see that's not the fun part of life then. But
Right.
I do think like the more that we unfriend, we find ourselves in these sort of echo chambers or silos of like, where we only have friends who can validate us or who, won't challenge us. And sometimes that might be good for the mental health. It might be good just to not have to, what do people
Spice
call
of
it?
life.
Doom scrolling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But part of me is, I've never done a post like that. Have you ever done that? I've never done it myself. And I think part of it is like, I think because I love friendship so much, I am sensitive to the fact of excluding people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a saying that says a friend to everyone is a friend to no one. And I think there's a difference between being a friend and being friendly. And I think Facebook is way beyond it simply being friends, right?
Absolutely.
Everyone from who knows where and who knows what time. And sometimes, do you ever see people on Facebook, you're like, who is that?
When did that happen?
Like, do they get married? Whose name is that?
Yeah.
But like, I think that's probably why. And also, there's other ways to go about it, right? And so
Absolutely.
versus like doing sort of this upfront, post of, if you don't like this, unfriend me, or just unfriending people and letting people know, like, there's other ways to do it. Like, have you ever snoozed someone for 30 days on Facebook? Or
even on like Instagram and other
you can mute on Twitter.
Yeah, mute. Exactly. Yeah.
So it's like, because to me, that's one of the things, it seems very final with unfriending. So if they go to look for you, you're not there. Or it says add them as a friend, which happened to me recently. I went to go look up a relative, and it said add relative as a friend. And I was like, they unfriended me.
What?
And I was like, oh my gosh, it's my first unfriending that I'm aware of.
Yeah, aware of too, right? It's like, it's a spooky thing.
I got ghosted by blood.
But not Dracula.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's lots of scary things, and blood and ghosts are two of them. But one of the things is like, I can wager a guess it's because we have different political beliefs. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. You unfriended me, but I had hid you for the last 5 years. So, so you didn't come up in my newsfeed anyways, because then it shows we're still friends. And I'm like, so is that a problem? Do you just hide people and then never deal with it? Or do you make a public announcement and say, y'all about to get snipped? Or you can snip yourself.
It's exactly like, do you maintain those social norms of, what it means to be a good social network friend, maintain the peace, so to speak, or do you just go out there and make that post? But again, that's why it was so interesting. There was no difference in neuroticism, extroversion, none of that. But even maybe a little bit more interesting is that, the average number of friends that these people lost was only 3 as a result of their post. Yeah. So like, you make this post and you be expecting like this giant purge of, all these friends unfriending you. But on average, the users in our study only reported about, 3 friends that they lost of this. So, to your point though, it brings up a great question of like, well, what's the point, right?
Yeah, that seems very disappointing if you want people to delete you. You're hoping for
Exactly.
like a max exodus, like
Right.
bye, and they're like, "Nah, I'll stay. It's fine, whatever."
And so, this observation, or at least this thing
Yeah.
that we're seeing here,
Yeah.
it kind of raises maybe another question as to, well, are these people, are they really posting these unfriending messages to really, you know, disfriend a whole bunch of people? Or is the motivation behind these types of posts really more about like image management, or like,
Ooh.
I want to show off to my friend group that like I believe in this so much that
Yeah.
I'm willing to lose some friends over
Yeah.
this. Like, if you don't believe in climate change,
Yeah.
unfriend me now. If you
Yeah.
don't vote for this person, unfriend me now. And that in itself can almost be a way of like relationship management, where you're kind of saying, listen, to all my in-group friends, I believe so strongly about this that I am willing to lose some people over it. Right. And so maybe rather than a way of truly kind of drawing the line between some friends or a lot of friends, it's really a way for people, specifically through the affordances that social media present, to really maintain some self of individual image management.
I think that's fascinating, because I think like when I thinking of myself here, there are things that I've posted in the last year where I'm like, if people want to delete me inside my head, feel free, but like I feel like I can't be silent on things that I have a duty as an individual who would like to be viewed as an ally. I realize that I can't call myself an ally. Other people, if I am in fact an ally, will call me that. But if I do in fact want to do that and use my voice, and I think because both of us teach, like, how can I not be supportive of my students? Like,
absolutely,
I think about my students all the time. So I have definitely, that is really interesting to me, is that, I mean, I've never posted something specifically, but I have thought, well, if someone wants to drop me on Facebook, maybe that's for the better, or, whatever the case is. Or I'm like, I wonder how many people hid me after that.
Right. And actually, and doing that, in a way, it actually affords you that credibility, if you want to call it that, right? The social capital, the support.
Yeah.
Because you're communicating to your friends, like, I am willing to lose these friendships.
Yeah.
At the cost of these issues that are deep down to my core, these virtues, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really, although this is a spooky thing of unfriending, there is kind of a bright side to it, because it really does strengthen those social bonds, those friends, that network, that does share those similar virtues and beliefs.
Yeah, because unfriending, I think, can be unscary. It can be scary, but I also think, like, because my students follow me on Facebook and other social media. I want them to know that I'm a person that they can speak to, that they know that if they feel so comfortable, that they know, even if they never need to come to me at any point, at least they know that I'm some level of support. But I love how you say, like, there's a light side. Can't have the dark without the light, and you can't have the light without the dark. You got both of those. But I guess for me is like, I think maybe for me personally, what's really scary would be unfriending someone who is like a close friend, right? Like, I can see people being like, I can do without these individuals. But when I got unfriended by a relative, I was like, excuse me, sir.
Like that was uncalled for. Like, that hurts,
I was like, oh no, it's fine. Like I say, he's been hidden for 5 years, but whatever.
And I think that's one of the definite rooms for future research, and this idea of like this invited, more passive unfriending, if you will, because like you said, like, you got to think about those, like the social network norms. Like, even though you're not really quote unquote friends with someone, as Dr. Rollins said, like, idea of turning it into a verb, like, do you still just keep them as friends? Like, for example, when MySpace was a thing, and back in the day,
MySpace.
a throwback there, top eight, exactly,
baby.
right? And then they found out ways to create a top 16 and all that stuff because people were getting jealous. But, back when, MySpace really took off and then Facebook started, in like the, 2007, 8, 9, that whole period, this idea of adding friends was like, got to get numbers, like numbers.
Yeah.
And that's how it really started. And over the years, it's become, well, maybe it's more about quality rather than quantity. And, we know that the average number of friends a Facebook user has, I think it's somewhere around like 360 or so, something like that. Like that's the average.
Yeah.
But that really doesn't, it doesn't really quantify the depth of those friendships, the meaning behind those friendships, the wonderful things that some friendships bring and maybe the not so great things that other friendships have. So, how can we differentiate between those people who we want to keep in our circle and we want to express those values to, and those that, maybe there's like that friend from high school that I took, I had social studies with and I haven't spoke to in 9 years, right? Like, where do you draw the line?
Well, I love Facebook because it's one of those things where it's like your high school reunion's coming up and it's like, why? I've been on Facebook with them since 2006. I know what's up.
Yeah, exactly.
And so now I feel bad because I wonder if like high school reunions are like decreasing because the social media helps us stay in contact, right? But I think this, like I said, I think this is a really interesting area of research because I think it's a phenomenon that we see. I'm sure many of the listeners were nodding their heads when you said that people post these things where it's like, if you don't like this, just unfriend me now, right? Like, and like, why they might have done it if they had, or what they thought when did they unfriend someone based off that. Like, I think these are things that we are experiencing. And so as communication researchers and relationship researchers, it's important that your team is studying this so that we can have a better understanding of why these things might be happening. And like I said, often is, and then what can we do? But I think also that, getting into the unfriending of, when it's really sort of a challenge to cut someone out of your life, right? Like, so have you ever unfriended someone that you were close with, Nate?
I have. Yes, I have.
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot now. I'm like, hi. Was that something that was hard, or was that something like because of whatever might have occurred, it was an easy decision for you?
So there's this idea of social exchange theory where it's kind of like costs and benefits, right? Like, do the benefits of being in this friendship outweigh the costs? Is a very simple way to simplify that. And, this was a friend who I had known in terms of like a professional academic sense. This wasn't like a childhood friend or anything like that. And, me personally, I enjoy logging on to Facebook, logging on to Instagram every once in a while and, seeing photos of, life updates, like people going on vacation, is there a newborn or, what's new with the family and stuff like that. And
Alysa's 138th photo of Finn in the last 3 weeks.
Pets, animals, like, baked goods. What are people doing? Like, what's your sourdough starter looking like, right? Like, what's going on in your life?
Absolutely.
And truth be told, I tried to separate my academic professional life from my social life. And this person in particular was just every single week, it was like, look at my newest publication, look at my newest conference paper, my students love me, like, look at all this, look at me. And it was very just kind of overwhelming for me to the point where it's like, man, like, this is making me think about, my own work and my own things. And I don't want to think about that at 9 p.m.
Yeah.
And so, I've seen this person at conferences since then. And, we've talked and, it's not like anything has changed between the friendship, so to speak. And that may be some competence to some extent of like, we both understand that we can be friends and face to face, but not online.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, that was the reason for that unfriending. It was just really just too much of content that I truly did not enjoy.
Yeah, and it's hard because we have talked on here about like social comparison. Even when you're not like graduate school is hard, and like going on academic Twitter, that's an unfollow for me. Where it's like, look how many things I got published, and you know what? I'm proud of you, but no one likes to show off.
Yeah. So, for me, the benefits of having that quote unquote friendship on a social network, definitely were way less than the costs associated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like that you brought up social exchange, because there are costs and benefits, and I probably did something similar. I have not done it, but I have thought about unfriending someone that I've known since college, and there was just like a particular event, and I just don't want anything to do with them. But I think that there are a lot of costs for unfriending them, and so I didn't want to deal with those costs of doing the unfriending. So I've never done it. Right. So
yeah, I have a great story to share about that too. Actually, that may be interesting to, or maybe of some use to some viewers out there. But, I had a situation where before I went to graduate school, I was working in San Francisco. And, there was this, moment of life where I was just really having fun. I was working and meeting new people. And these are, I was with a group of my friends one night who I've known since middle school, like, some of my closest friends, teammates, what have you. And, at the time, there's this, gal who I was interested in, like a little romantic thing going on.
Hey.
Hey, right. And I was like, oh, like this person's really cool. And then they jokingly said, oh, we're going to add her on Facebook. And I said, haha, like, that's funny, but don't do that. Like, you've never met her. Like,
no, come on.
The next day I get a text message from the girl like, hey, by the way, like, who are these people? I'm like, are you kidding me? And I was just like, I felt so betrayed. I just felt so many negative emotions and feelings. I basically told him, like, why would you guys do that? Like, I'm just not talking to y'all anymore. And it was a really tough situation because I'm like, I could unfriend them. I could just leave it as whatever. I decided not to unfriend them on Facebook or social media. And I didn't talk to them for about a year. And, I don't have Facebook installed on my phone or anything like that.
Good for you.
I check it I check it, I log in every once in a while. But, about a year after that incident, I log into Facebook and I check my messages. And those guys, they never removed me from the group chat. Like, and they kept on conversing and talking, and they left me in there. And I thought to myself, like, why? Like, you had all of the reasons, you had all the right in the world just to completely remove that, to unfriend me from their group chat, right? Like, Nate was being a jerk to us. He wasn't communicating to us. Like, he was giving us the cold shoulder. Like, these people had all the reasons to do that to me, but they didn't. And I thought about them like, And so, at that point, I matured a little bit more, and I had a conversation with them, and, a communicative event. I'm like, hey, listen, like, what you did a year ago really hurt. Like, you betrayed me and all that stuff. And we talked about it, and, we got over it, and we're friends again.
Yay!
So, there may be moments where it's like, oh, should I unfriend this person? Like, they totally did this really terrible thing to me. But, sometimes if you don't hit that unfriend and you let things settle, good things may come a year or two later. You never know.
That's an excellent point, because I think like some people might be listening. It's just like, unfriend someone or do this. You don't have to, you don't account to anyone. You're in charge of your life and that sort of thing. But I think that we might see technology as this thing that's just to an aside of relationships. And to me, it's intertwined with our relationships. And there's so many more maybe considerations, or we don't know necessarily. We try to apply like in real life expectations or norms onto technology, and maybe it doesn't fit exactly. And, and then there might be all sorts of factors. Maybe this is a research study in the future, right? There might be people who are more sensitive to it, or people who are not, say, in a secure attachment style might be less likely to unfriend, or there could be lots of different reasons why. And so I think for anyone that it's easy to unfriend people, like, I bet your life is free from a lot of stress. So kudos. But those of us like myself who are like walking anxiety 24/7, it's a little bit harder. But I really like I think this is a great piece of advice that maybe it is going lay off it for a while and see what happens, because I think that unfriending is final in a lot of ways, because yeah, you could friend them again, but they might not know that you unfriended them. And then that brings up, well, why'd you unfriend me? And if it's someone who is close to you, who is a friend in real life and on Facebook, that probably has more implications than someone I met once 3 years ago. Like,
right.
And they look, when my name comes up, and they're probably like, who is that? So I think like there are some like maybe greater implications or effects that can have on in real life relationships when thinking about the technology in our life. And that never occurred to me to go, hey, maybe I'll just chill out for a year and see what happens.
Like
Maybe because I'm walking anxiety 24/7, I don't actually chill out. That might be the case.
And the most interesting thing to me about that whole ordeal, that whole situation was too, like, it takes two to tango, right? Like,
absolutely.
Even if I a year later came back thinking, wow, you know what? I've changed, I've matured a little bit, I have these different thoughts and these different values, that doesn't necessarily mean that those groups of friends had the same thoughts or values or feelings as well, right?
Yeah.
And so in some ways, maybe the stars have to perfectly align for that to work again.
Yeah.
But then you think about other forms and other social media networks, things like Instagram, right, where you could unfollow people, you can mute people, and then you almost have like this deceptive form of you're following in your friends or followers with someone, but if you just have them on mute and you're not getting any of their feed, it's like, well, what's actually happening there?
Yeah.
It's.
I think there's just so much to study. Okay, we have like the the active conscious, like, get rid of me if you didn't vote for this person, or you didn't do this, or you don't like SpongeBob. And then you have sort of like, oh, I just put people on mute and I just do this, because then you're doing like the obligatory friendship without it being real. So there is some deceptive communication that might occur there. Then there's people who just like unfriend people and they ghost, right? And there is this article from Exploring Your Mind from February of this year that talked about it's a cold way to end friendships. Like, if you don't at least say like, I'm going to unfriend you, or have some conversation. And then we have like instances where it's like a roll back and forth, like with betrayal, or there's some sort of event of like a really close friend in real life that makes it difficult. And there's lots of things to navigate. And I love that your research team got the first steps going. And I think it's very timely with the presidential election coming up, because I'm sure we've seen that, the listeners, me, you, we've all seen more of that recently, not just on Facebook, but on Twitter. For sure, you can unfollow me or block me, or, whatever the case is, or I'm going to block you because of this, this, and this. And so I just love like these first steps, and there's still so much to learn about unfriending. And I learned something new. Did you know that November 17th is National Facebook Unfriend Day?
What? Okay.
Yeah, Jimmy Kimmel, the host of Jimmy Kimmel Live, came up with this in 2010. And this year it will be on November 17th as National Facebook Unfriend Day. And it was described in the CNN article from 2019. And it said, at a certain point, we've reached a threshold of social connections. And that's a direct quote. Like, we might have too many people, which goes to your point of like, it's about numbers. Is it actually about the quality and those sorts of things? And so they also talked about in the article, this might be the time to delete anyone with unrecognizable names. Who are you? Your ex whoever. So that could be romantic crushes. You got ghosted by them, or maybe friends, obnoxious political ranter is another reason to unfriend. And number 5, they listed as those people you just don't connect with anymore, which would go back to your likes and dislikes. So I think like what you're getting at is that people will make these posts and try and understand why. And that I think Jimmy Kimmel was getting at this idea is that the quantity is too many and it should be about quality. But what I would say is that isn't too far away, November 17th. So maybe you treat it like a holiday. I don't know. What do you put out for, like, you know how you have Santa Claus, you leave out like cookies, you leave out carrots or like the reindeer. Like, what do you leave out the night before a Facebook Unfriend Day? Maybe a post that says tomorrow's National Unfriend Day. So I'll see you on the other side of the purge. And then you'll have more data.
There you go.
But I also think, like, if that's something people do, is being mindful maybe of how they do it. Right? Is
Absolutely.
it done publicly? Does it need a conversation? And I guess in the end of it, if unfriending someone helps your day-to-day life and you're 9 p.m. scrolling, I scroll right before bed, so I completely understand. Or it just helps your mental health every day, then I would think that unfriending is still, although it is two sides and there's a relationship, that we should perhaps come first, and then, but you should consider if a conversation might be needed, because ghosting can be hurtful. There's so many things. Can you go do more research now?
2021, that's the year.
That's the year. Well, we all thought 2020 was going to be the year, Nate.
I will say though, like, I hope people are very mindful of the fact that, they do have a lot of, like you mentioned, you have a lot of power, you have a lot of say in deliberately choosing like more of an active unfriending technique, where you have that conversation between someone, or you choose not to, or that more passive invited unfriending, right? There are different ways to go about this if you so choose.
Yeah. And maybe it doesn't have to be as scary as I've made it to be. Because I'm always like, what are spooky friendship things? I'm like, ghosting, unfriending, betrayal.
Yeah. Like you said,
sorts of things.
There's a light side to the dark side.
You gotta have, what is, are you a Harry Potter fan?
Used to. I read the books.
Yeah. I'm not entirely a fan. I'm a fan of the environment and not maybe necessarily the author right now. But Dumbledore has the quote about when you're in the dark, you always need to look for the light. And so if you are experiencing scary friendship interactions or events, that look for the light, and maybe that's listening to a few episodes of Best Forevers, or definitely episode 8 and then this episode, because Nate's on it and he is delightful, and delightful has light in it. So
oh gosh, you're making me blush now.
You're a joy. You are a joy. And I'm just, every time you share research, it's just something that, like, I'm going to be on board because it has to do with friendship in some way. But there's usually something about like staying in contact, or like why do we do these things, and how, I don't know. It gets me excited about
spice of life.
Yeah. It makes me get excited about doing research. If only I had more time.
I think now more than ever, especially given the whole, we're separated from lots of our friends and our family, and with everything going on in the world, it's more clear now than ever just how important friendships are. And to really just, like you mentioned in the guest lecture you gave for my class, really, you gotta make an intentional decision and an act to keep those friendships going. And if you are at the point where you are thinking about potentially unfriending someone, give it a second thought, think about it, maybe reach out, meta communicate a little bit, talk about your communication with that person, but really got to look out for your own health and well-being too. Like if the friendship just isn't doing anything for you, and it's toxic to the point where it's hurting your mental health and well-being, maybe it's best to put yourself first. That's what I would say.
Snip, block.
Snip, block.
But I think, being in a pandemic, absolutely, friendships are really important. And if there is someone or some people that you might be leaning towards unfriending, I think what you're saying, Nate, is like, maybe think about it. I think your example of your personal experience is really it can be, you don't always have to feel obligated to talk to people or do something right away. Like, take your time, figure it out. But also, when you're saying, like, look for the light in the dark, if there's a relationship that isn't working for you, which ones are you maintaining? Are you spending so much time on a relationship that is problematic for you and your mental health? And then forgetting about all these wonderful people, or maybe one wonderful person or three, it doesn't matter, like, but focusing on being sure that you can reach out and stay connected. Absolutely.
Yeah. Time is a limited resource, right? If you're spending it on think about, oh, like, this person's so negative, I don't like what this person writes, then you're not spending that time you're not spending that time, or you're not allocating it to the friends who you do enjoy and their successes and their triumphs. And
that's where put your attention there, because those are the people who rock and matter. That's for sure. So we've talked about so much related to unfriending today that it's very exciting. Lots of ideas going in my head. And so, of course, I want to talk them all out. So if you're listening right now and you have a story about why you unfriended, what happened when someone unfriended you, are you the person who's like, unfriend me? If you don't, tell us everything. You can email me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com, as well as you can find me on all the social medias at bestforeverspod. And I always want to hear the details. So until next time, friends, first of all, vote and happy Halloween, but also consider whether or not it's worth unfriending folks in our life, because without our friends, who would we be? Thanks for listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.
Hi, I'm Liz.
And I'm Josh.
And together we are Bloody Date Night.
Bloody Date Night asks the question, can a horror expert show his horror novice
Who you calling a horror novice?
horror movies that he loves and she's seeing for the first time?
It's about what happens when you introduce the person you love to the thing you love, and they're probably gonna hate it.
Just like me with taxes.
We're Bloody Date Night. Give us a listen.
Get your headphones on and bebop time.